Today I wanted to go over the basics of Unity, just how to make a project and the basics of the interface. So to start, Unity projects are launched and managed through the Unity Hub, so we have to go through the Unity Hub in order to launch projects. The hub is going to be where we see all our projects, as well as where we can see all our installs of Unity. If you have used Unreal Engine, it's pretty similar. We use the Epic Launcher where we install Unreal Engine, and then we make projects from there. Same thing in Unity. So when you first launch this, when you first launch the Unity Hub, it's going to prompt you to log in. So if you don't have an account, make an account, and then log in using that account, and then the hub will open up for you. So similar to Unreal, when we launch the hub, the first thing we want to do is install a version of Unity, which we can do through this Installs tab, Install Editor right here. So Unity is a little different from Unreal in how they release versions. I believe right now with Unreal 5 specifically, we'll do 5.3, 5.4, 5.5. So they release them with a 1 decimal point kind of version. Unity's a little different than that. So you can see right here, I have Unity 6.1.14F1. And if I choose to install, you can see there's 4 versions here. If we click this archive button, it takes us to the website where we can install it'll give us options of every single release they've had. Unity tends to release versions more often than Unreal. So whatever version we want to install on our personal computers, we just have to make sure that is the exact same version that is on the school computers. I'm not sure what's on the school computers, but whatever version is on the school computers, we would want to install that on our personal computers. That way we can move the projects around, work at home, work in class, and we're not going to run into an issue where, suddenly we use a newer version of the editor and it doesn't let us use the old version again with that project. Remember, we can always upgrade projects. We cannot downgrade them. So that's just a very important note. Whatever version you install on your home computer, make sure it's the same as a school computer. So my suggestion would be for your home computers, instead of just installing a version of the editor, whatever is available here, make a project on the school computer, and you can just take that project to your home, add it to your Unity project, open it up in the hub. And when we try and open that project, Unity is going to prompt us. It's going to be like, hey, do you want to install the version that this project is associated with it? And we just say yes. So instead of going through this, make a project in school, bring it back to your home computer, and then let it auto-detect what version and install the editor from there. That's probably the easiest way of just making sure these 2 versions match. Okay, so assuming we have a version installed, let's make a project. So first, we just click the plus new project button. And again, similar to Unreal, if you've ever used it, it's going to ask us a few questions. It's going to ask us what template we want to use. So again, if you've used Unreal, Unreal has a bunch of little templates that we can use to create our project. Unity has the same. In fact, Unity has a lot of templates we could download. For this class, we are going to stick to Universal 3D, which is what is selected by default. Next, it asks you to pick a Unity organization. Unity should make it a default organization for your account. Just select that. It's going to ask for your project name, so this is a little important. When you look at the project name, there's a little cloud icon next to it. So by default nowadays, Unity chooses to save the projects in its own cloud. I'm not sure why they made this decision. I'm assuming it's because they want to upsell you on, their cloud features and their cloud subscription and stuff. But their projects default to the cloud. So we can just click this drop down, and instead of create new project in the cloud, which, it doesn't even say create new cloud project, it just says create new project. We want to create a new local project. So this little computer icon here. And this is just going to create the project locally on our computer, and it's not going to bother, storing it up in the Unity cloud. We can rename this. Instead of calling it my project, I'm just going to call it test. And finally, we choose a location. So mine defaults to F projects Unity. That's where I want it stored. So we can pick a location for this project to save itself in. And then there's this checkbox for use Unity's version control. We don't want it on. It's not on by default. So we're all good. So with all that set, we just click the create project button. And the engine's going to start getting to work making this new project. A new project takes time to create, especially when we first launch it. So we just, got to wait for it to open. Okay, after a while, our engine opens up, and this is the basic editor screen that we see. So let's take a second and just talk about all the stuff that we see, on screen. Starting with just this top bar up here. It says test, which is the name of the project. Sample scene, so this is the level that's open. In Unity, levels are called scenes. And when we make a new project, it gives us a scene called sample scene. So that's the one that's open. And then it says Windows, Mac, Linux. These are Windows, Mac, Linux. These are the, these are the platforms that this editor is supported in. So all three of those. And then it says the version of Unity up here. So this is the default editor window. These are the things that you're going to see when you open up Unity. As you use Unity, you'll start making changes to what your editor looks like. And, when you open up Unity again, those changes are just going to stay. If by chance your editor looks slightly different or things are, they don't look right, all we need to do is on the top left, come to this little layout button here. And then you just select default and the editor will refresh back into default. There's some other layouts that Unity gives us by, default. You can select something like tall or wide, whatever floats your boat. I'm just going to use default for now. And again, as you work on the editor, you're going to start opening up windows, putting them in places. And we can also come under here and you can do save layout. So if you wanted to save it as my layout, you will see that, that your layout just shows in this list now. So obviously this is the same as default, but you get the point. We can make changes to it, and then we can save our layout. Very convenient feature. Okay, so by default, the windows that are open is our scene window. So this is our 3D scene, and we'll take a look in just a second how to navigate it. We have a hierarchy, which you can see there's 3 items in our scene right now, and by clicking on them, it also selects them in the scene. We have a camera, a directional light, and a global kind of volume. This is our post-processing volume. One, important thing, again, if you've used Unreal, this should be kind of familiar, is that this hierarchy and the scene, they're basically both the same thing. The hierarchy is just a hierarchical representation. It represents things in terms of, parent-child relationships. And the scene is a visual representation. It's a nice 3D representation for us to look at. Underneath, we have the project folder. So this is the project browser. This is where we can see all our assets. These are the things that Unity already gave us. And, this is where we're going to add stuff. Our materials, our textures, our models, sound effects, our scripts, all going to be added in here. And this is where we're going to keep everything organized. Along with assets, there's another subfolder here called packages. And this is where all the different packages that we have in Unity are going to go. And it's just so that things can stay organized. So when sometimes when we add a package from the asset store, it's going to go in here instead of filling up our assets with things that aren't quite necessary for us to see constantly, but are an important part of our game. Next to that, we have the console. We'll take a look at this in the future video. This is where when we print strings, when we do like a debug log or a print string, this is where we're going to see it. Very useful for debugging, something we're going to use constantly throughout this quarter. Very useful to always have open. And then finally, on the right side, the whole tab is taken up by the inspector. So if I was to click this main camera here, you can see the inspector just populates with all the options that the camera has. We can change stuff here. We can look at it. Same thing. When I click the directional light, we can see the type of options have changed. But these are the options that the directional light has. Same with the global volume, and anything we add here is going to show us the options for that. And finally, up here we have the little menu bar, which has file, edit, assets, game objects, components, services, has a bunch of stuff, and we'll take a look at those as and when we need to. Not really important, but good to know it's up there. So if I say go up to game object, 2D objects, and add something, you know where that button is. Okay, let's take a quick look on just how to navigate through this environment. So to help us kind of look at this editor, so we're not just looking at, this gray screen here. I'm just going to add a model into this editor so that, we have something to look at and while we're learning the controls. And so I have this rubber duck model here. This is also a good chance just to show you guys how to import things. Very simple in Unity. Just click, drag, and put it in here. And you can see that there's the rubber duck. So all we need to do is drag the duck into either the hierarchy or just into the scene, and it places it there. Okay, so let's go over the basic editor controls first. If you've used Unreal, a lot of these controls are going to be similar. Again, a lot of 3D software use very similar controls, so if you learn one, it's simple to transfer to another one, which I think is a good thing. So to start, you can left-click on things to select them. Same way, we can left-click on the hierarchy to select things. If we hold right-click down, we go into a look mode, which is symbolized by the little eye icon there, and we can look around. This is similar to any kind of first-person game. We can look around. If we one nice thing in Unity, if we move our mouse to the edge of the screen, it just warps to the other side. Very convenient little feature. While holding right-click down, you can use the WSAD keys to move around. Again, just like a first-person shooter. You can also use Q and E to move up and down. And finally, again, very similar to any kind of first-person game, you can hold Shift and it increases your movement speed. So it's like sprinting, right? And all of this makes it very easy to navigate around the environment. While holding the right click down, you can also use the scroll wheel and you can see a little pop-up pops up with a multiplier on it. And this is our camera speed. So you can see our camera speed's at 1. And if I was to lower it, it's moving much slower. So again, this is a good way to, move around, get some fine-grained movement in there, moving our camera exactly where we want to. Very convenient and fairly easy to do. If we can also, with an asset selected, hit the F key to zoom into the asset and look at it. From here, we can hold the Alt key and left click and drag around to orbit around the object. With the Alt key still pressed, you can also hold the right click and you can zoom in and out. And this becomes very important. This is probably one of the main ways we navigate around the environment, along with just regular right clicking, is to click on something, hit F, and orbit around it. It makes it really quick to move around. You just find it, you click on an object far away, hit F, let the camera move us there, and then we can orbit around it, which gives us a nice view of the object. And those, again, the main two ways of navigating is just holding right click and WSADing, or focusing on an object using the F key, and then holding Alt and using left and right click to orbit and zoom in and out around it. You can also just use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. And you can hold the middle mouse button to go into a panning mode. If these controls seem a little overwhelming to you, if you've not used other 3D software, don't worry. It'll become second nature over a week or two. It's not that hard. It's just if you haven't used any 3D software, it can seem a little daunting. It's not. Okay. The other thing we can do is you can see these little gizmos up here. It says XYZ. If you've used something like Maya, this is pretty similar. If we click on one of them, it moves the camera to that plane, and we can look at our objects dead on. Same thing with Y, same thing with Z, same thing with X. This becomes very useful when aligning things. You might have two walls that need to align. Well, when you do it in a 2D kind of view like this, they just become easier to align. So it's great that we have that here. The other thing you can do, and this isn't quite useful, it might not be useful, is it says perspective. So right now the camera that we're looking at has perspective in it. You can click it and you can make it orthographic. So now there is no sense of perspective. Everything is flat. So again, maybe useful, maybe not useful, but just know that you can change this on the fly. Those are the basic of the basic editor controls. Of moving the camera around the editor. And again, if you're not used to it, it's very simple. You'll get used to it pretty quickly. So next, moving on, let's just learn how to manipulate objects a little bit. So when I click on this, you can see these three little arrows that symbolizes the move gizmo. If you've used Unreal, if you use Maya, very similar. If you've used Blender, not as similar because Blender is a little different. But most 3D softwares kind of use this principle of having a little 3D gizmo like this. So, I can drag one of these around, and you can see I can move it around. I can even drag the little rectangles in between to lock it to 2 axes. So here I'm moving it on the Y and the Z, and I'm not moving it on the X. Again, this makes it easier rather than having to move it, on the Z axis first and on the Y. You can just do both together. And we can do that with any set of 2 axes. It's an easy way to move things around. If we come up here, you can see that I'm currently selected the Move tool. Next to it is the Rotate tool, similar to the Move tool, except it turns our gizmo into a little rotation gizmo. We have the Scale tool, which does the same thing, except in scale. And finally, we have the Rect tool. This is usually used for 2D sprites. Unity lets us use it on 3D objects. If you've used Photoshop, this is similar to the transform in that. So we can drag it in the corners and we can scale it up like that. And finally, Unity has a transform tool. This just kind of combines the scale, move, and rotate tools all into one. I don't normally use this. I just choose to move, scale, rotate independently. We can also use shortcuts to switch between these. You can hit the W key for move, the E key for rotate, and the R key for scale. So just W-E-R. The thing is on the top row of our keyboard. Again, something you get used to over time. Next, and kind of the final thing, just about the basics of moving object or manipulating objects. With an object selected, you can hit Control D for duplicate, and that's how we duplicate objects. And you can see, even in my hierarchy here, it has been duplicated. I'm just going to delete these other docs. Okay, so that's the basics of, again, using the editor, manipulating objects, and if, again, these seem a little foreign to you, it'll come naturally. It just takes a little bit of practice. So the last little editor thing I want to look at is these view modes up here. Really, this is useful when you're set dressing a level, when you're looking at your assets in the level. There's tons of uses for it, and it's just good to know it exists here. You currently, if I hover over this, we're in unlit draw mode. We can go into a shaded mode, which is going to take some time for our shader to compile, but you can see now the light has been applied to it. I'll go back to unlit. There's a shaded wireframe, which shows us a shaded model plus the wireframe. And then there's just the wireframe mode, which turns everything into a wireframe. So this is, again, useful for looking at our things in different ways, especially if you're working on lighting, because Unity defaults to the unlit mode. You might be working on your lighting, and you're like, why isn't anything changing? We got to go to the shaded mode for that. Okay, let us talk about the makeup of Unity's game objects, which is the basic... the basic unit of a Unity game is a game object. I'm going to compare this to Unreal. If you haven't used Unreal, that's okay. If you have, this will just help us build up, our understanding of this. In Unreal, we have things called actors. If you've ever placed, if you've used Unreal, placed an asset into the level, it's an actor. If you've made custom blueprints in Unreal for a game, you've made actors, so you likely know about that. In Unreal, when we make actors, we assign our actors certain components, right? So we'll make an actor, we'll put a mesh component on it, we might put a sound component on it. We put components onto an actor. This is a very common paradigm in game engine specifically. It's called compositional programming. Basically, we have a basic object, and we give it components to compose it to make it, what we want it to be. So, for example, we might have a game object that has a mesh attached to it. We might have a game object that has a light attached to it. They're both game objects, but instead of our game object class having both light and mesh functionality, we create components that we can attach to these as and when we need to, thereby not making the game object class too bloated. Instead, we take what we want and we compose it using these little components. That is a very key feature of Unity. The basic object in Unity is called a game object. If I was to right click in the hierarchy, and you can see there's create empty, and that creates an empty, and Unity even calls it a game object. Game objects have a couple of things that they all have in common, but the main thing all game objects have, and again, that's the important thing for us, is a transform. So when I made this game object here, you can see in the inspector, I can see a transform. So the way to think about this is I've made a game object, and this inspector is going to show me all the components associated with the game object. Right now, this game object has one component that is a transform component, which controls where the game object is in 3D space, what its rotation is, and what its scale is relative to, the world around it. So going back to this rubber duck here, it is a game object. It has a transform. It has this transform component here. And it also has two other components. It has a mesh filter and a mesh renderer. So these two components, a mesh filter and a mesh renderer, help us see a 3D model on screen. If I was to click on this directional light, it does not have a mesh renderer. It does not have a mesh filter because it's not a mesh. Instead, it has a light component on it, which gives us lighting options. What type of light is it? What type of mode? Do we want a real-time or baked? What the color, the temperature, things associated with lights. Same thing with the main camera. It has a transform, and then it has a camera component on it. It also has an audio listener component. This is what listens to audio and outputs it. But the main thing is it has a camera component. And the nice thing about Unity is we can just willy-nilly add components to different game objects. So if I wanted to this duck, I could add a light component. If I wanted to this duck, I can add a camera component. I shouldn't have the camera component here. I shouldn't really need a light component here. But the point is we're composing this object, right? So this rubber duck, I have given it two more components here, a light component and a camera component. And you'd see that, when I added this light component, it added another component called universal additional light data. That's just automatically done. But the important thing is I've added these two components. And just like that, I can also remove them. By clicking on these three dots next to a component, I can go down to remove component and remove it. And so the same applies to my game object that I just made. I could come in here, I could add a light to it, and now this becomes a light. If I go into the lit mode, we can see that it's very far away. But as I move it closer, it affects the lighting on the duck, because this has a light component attached to it. And so this is important, especially when we write scripts in Unity. Our scripts are going to be components that we attach to an object. So, for example, you might have a player, we might be making, or in this class, we will be making a third-person game. So we're going to have our third-person player. That's going to be a model, the skeletal mesh, the materials attached to it, and then we're going to attach a component to it that is our player controller script. And again, if I was to compare this to Unreal, it's just a little different. Both of them are built on this compositional programming model. But in Unity, we create a game object in the scene. We attach the stuff we want to it, the components we want to it. In Unreal, on the other hand, you make a blueprint actor which contains code, and we attach the components to that. So we can't attach different scripts to an actor very easily through Blueprint specifically. Instead, we create an actor that has blueprints, and then we put components on top of that. In some ways, Unreal is easier to use. In some ways, Unity is a little bit more flexible because I can make two different actors per se and just edit them separately in my level without needing to save them out in my asset folder. And finally, the last thing I wanted to go over is, again, I mentioned Unreal, we make an actor, right? So if you've used Unreal, you would come down to your content browser, you would create a blueprint actor, and you would have it right here, and I can reuse that actor as many times as I want. But in Unity, I would create stuff in my level, and if I wanted to reuse them, we need to create what is known as a prefab. A prefab is just us taking a game object and saving it, basically, for later use. So I'm just going to call this game object, I'm going to rename it to prefab test. And very simple, all we need to do to save a prefab is just drag it over to our project, and there you go. You can see it comes in as this blue set of squares that make a cube. That symbolizes a prefab. In fact, even here, you can see that our little prefab test has changed from this hollow, or this blank cube, to the blue cube to symbolize that it's a prefab. And the nice thing about this is from here, I can edit this prefab test without affecting the other prefab test, so I can make variants of it. Or I can click this little arrow, go into this prefab test. You can't really see anything here, but if there was a model here, it would single it out. But we go into this, and any changes I make in this mode is going to apply to all of the prefabs. I can click the scenes button to get back out here. And so that just gives us another little bit of options. We have this prefab that we can reuse across scenes. If I wanted to make a change just to one of them, I can do that very easily. If I wanted to make a change for all of them, I could also do that very easily. So it's a little flexible that way. Okay, I've covered a lot in this video. I just want to go over one more thing before we close this one, just to get our heads around the basics. So we've learned, about how to navigate the editor, how to manipulate objects, and we've taken a basic look at the composition or the component-based programming that Unity has. Again, all those things will become more clear the more we use it. This is just an introduction to all that. But the last thing I just wanted to look at is the asset store in Unity. Very useful. Unity is built on assets and packages. So let's just take a look at that. So to open up the asset browser, we can go to Window, and I believe it's going to be Package Management, and we open up the Package Manager. So I'm going to dock this package manager just in my main area. And you can see that Unity comes in. So if I was to, this is in my project currently. Unity comes in with a bunch of packages. I can't remove a lot of these. I can remove some of them. But Unity comes in with a bunch of packages. These are all kind of the default ones that we use, to get the editor working. Like the basics of it, like something like mathematics, it's like a very basic package. The input system, another basic package. And this comes down a little bit to Unity's development philosophy. They want to be a bare bones engine, and we put packages into it to give it a bunch of its features. Unreal, on the other hand, is a little more monolithic. When we install it, it just comes in with all the features, and this can kind of be seen with the fact that Unreal's install size is very big. Unity's is much smaller, same thing with the project sizes, right? But really, we want to be able to add our own packages. And there's two main ones that we'll be working with. One are Unity registry packages. So these are made by Unity, approved by Unity. And you can see there's a lot of them here. You add them if and when you need them. So again, the nice thing is it's all piecemeal. We don't need to have all these plugins in here already. We add them when we need them. And then there's My Assets. So this is going to be assets connected to your account that you find on the asset store. So I have a few here. In fact, I have a lot of assets. Which you can see, just a bunch of assets here. So let's just take a quick look at how that works. If I was to go over to the Unity website, to assetstore.unity.com, make sure you are logged in with your Unity account. So I'm just going to do that real quick. And so you can see here, now I'm logged in with the same account. We can find assets here. There's a lot of assets Unity has. Unity assets are always on sale, very similar to the Unreal Store. If I could just find an asset that is free. So let us just look for... Let's go to pricing, which is not opening. Okay, not sure why that was broken, but I found this page, which is just free assets, so this is going to work for us. And there's a bunch of types of assets. There's scripts, there's models, there's going to be visual effects, animations, just a lot of things that Unity has. So you can look through it, and really I just want to show you how it works. Is you click on an asset that you want. So this is Fmod for Unity, which is like an audio tool. All you do is click Add to My Assets. And you accept and add it. Not sure why. Okay, There you go. So it's going to add, and you can see add it to my assets. And now if I was to go back here and refresh it, you'll see that Fmod for Unity, so the asset I just added on the store, is now in my list here, and you can download it and add it to your game if you want. So very simple to use. You just browse the website, add it, and then when you come back here, hit the refresh button, and you will see it here. So like that, I have a bunch of assets here. I'm sure you'll build up a library as well. There's a lot of good free assets. And for this class, it's great to look through it. You're more than welcome to use other asset stores as well. The Unreal Fab store has Unity assets, so feel free to look at that. But the Unity Package Manager, the asset store, is just integrated into Unity. If you can find assets on there, one, they'll be guaranteed to work with Unity, which is a good thing. And two, it's just easy to add, and you'll always have access to it as well. All right, so that's been a long kind of talk about just the basics of Unity. My suggestion would just be start playing around with it, find some assets, put it in here, see what the different components are, and play around with it. Thank you guys for watching.